Chapter 1773. Then, someone saved the rabbit and raised the wolf. From then on, the world became beautiful, Grim Demon said sarcastically. That's it. Joanne felt that the story wasn't over. Of course not. A wolf is ultimately a wolf, not a dog. However, that's not the most terrifying thing. Sometimes, a rabbit might not really be a rabbit. That's the most terrifying thing, Grim Demon said with a sneer. It's best you finish your story. Joanne had roughly figured out something. I'm done. You should be able to guess what happens next, Grim Demon said as he glanced at demonic neonate. Who's the rabbit? Joanne had roughly guessed that the Celestials were probably the wolf. As for demonic neonate or the race that demonic neonate represented, it was the hunter. As for the rabbit, Joanne wasn't sure. What do you think? Grim Demon asked. Immortals? Joanne guessed, but he wasn't sure. They look as cute as rabbits, but in fact they're even more terrifying than wolves. Grim Demon didn't say it out loud, but it was already a tacit agreement. After a pause, Grim Demon continued, Now, you should understand why I've repeatedly emphasized that I can't let Master be exposed, right? Understood, but now that I've been exposed, do you think the Immortals will come here? Joanne probed. That's right. I've been left in the dimension, unable to leave. In fact, it wasn't that he really didn't have the ability to leave the dimension. Even if the magic cube didn't send him back, he could still return himself. Others might not be able to do it, but Joanne, who had the mystic Tharch as a companion beast, could easily break through the spatial barrier. It wasn't difficult for him to return. He only wanted to obtain more information about demonic neonate from Grim Demon. Now, he finally knew demonic neonate's origins. It was even greater than Joanne had imagined. Demonic neonate, or the race that demonic neonate belonged to, was an existence that could suppress the Immortals and Celestials. Perhaps, perhaps not. The current Immortals are no longer the original Immortals. That rebellious Immortal is long gone from this world. Master has also become like this. Perhaps no Immortal can recognize her. Grim Demon pondered and said, however, it's best you leave immediately. It's better to be safe than sorry. Do you think this thing can fight an immortal expert? Joanne said as he held the golden trident in his hand. It's hard to say. If that traitor was still around, this thing wouldn't be a threat to her. Otherwise, the Protoss wouldn't have fallen for so long. If she wasn't here, perhaps this thing could scare those fellows, Grim Demon said. Joanne frowned slightly. What else do you want? Although I've been away from the dimension for a long time and don't know much about the Immortals' present strength, for them to be able to suppress the 6 sacred races again, there's no doubt that they have more than one apocalypse. You aren't at the apocalypse stage yourself. With this item's power, it's already not easy to fight an apocalypse. Do you want to fight all of them alone? Grim Demon mocked. That's true. In that case, let's return. As Joanne spoke, he ignored Grim Demon's expression and unsummoned demonic neonate. As demonic neonate's weapon, Grim Demon was also stored back into the demonic sword. Damn bastard, you will be struck by lightning sooner or later. Grim Demon realized that he had been tricked by Joanne and cursed inwardly. Joanne naturally couldn't hear his curse. Even if he could hear it, he definitely wouldn't take it to heart. He summoned the mystic Tharch to possess him as a soul and used the spatial teleportation power of the sky-stealing sun-shifting art to instantly return to Earth. Without the mystic Thearcha's power, the sky-stealing sun-shifting art couldn't break through the spatial barrier. He could only teleport in the dimension, making it impossible for him to return to Earth. Not long after Joanne returned to Earth, a terrifying existence tore through the sky and descended on the Divine Mountain. However, there was only an empty mountain left on the Divine Mountain. The terrifying existence scanned it for a long time but didn't discover anything. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have been so worried. I actually allowed a human punk to obtain the golden three-eyed god. The terrifying existence frowned slightly and stared at the divine mountain for a moment before turning to disappear. Several extremely terrifying existences descended on the divine mountain one after another. However, when they saw the empty divine mountain, no one was interested in staying any longer. However, they couldn't help but feel regretful. After a long time, more terrifying creatures arrived on the divine mountain. Furthermore, there was more than one. It was a woman who looked like a fairy. The clouds beneath her feet landed on the divine mountain. At the same time, she flicked her sleeve and something flew out. When the item flew out of her sleeve, it looked like it was only the size of a pellet, but when it landed in front of the temple, it turned into a huge white jade pillar. The white jade pillar stood in front of the temple's door. It was almost as tall as the huge temple, as though it had grown roots. There were black metal chains wrapped around the white jade pillar. Each of the metal chains pierced through a man's body and tied him firmly to the white jade pillar. Old Zhou, you really struck it rich this time. Now, there's probably no one in the entire Federation who doesn't know your name, Li Xian exclaimed excitedly when he saw Zhou Wen return. I don't want to be so famous either, but my strength doesn't allow it, Zhou Wen said with a smile. I gave you a ladder, but you really dared to climb it? Li Xian punched Zhou Wen and scolded him jokingly. You still have to have the ability to climb up. Zhou Wen turned to look at Tracking and said, My dear disciple, do you think I'm qualified to teach you now? Yes. Tracking nodded unexpectedly. His attitude was completely different from before. Previously, Zhou Wen had been able to force back the unnamed god's will. Tracking could still console himself, believing that it was the influence of Earth's laws that made it difficult for the unnamed god to display its true strength across space. But now, Zhou Wen was able to make the golden three-eyed celestial voluntarily sign the covenant of gods. This was a manifestation of absolute strength. Even an existence like the golden three-eyed celestial was willing to become Zhou Wen's weapon. It didn't seem shameful for her to be Zhou Wen's disciple. Seeing that Tracking's faith had wavered, Zhou Wen was about to say something when he saw the magic cube suddenly light up again. Someone is challenging the level again? Zhou Wen frowned slightly. He had already taken away the valuable items in the tomb of the fallen god. He didn't understand why the magic cube would continue fighting. This time, the person challenging the level wasn't a human, but an exotic beast that looked like a lion but had a body made of bronze. Unlike before, the scene of the fog lake didn't appear this time. The bronze lion directly appeared at the foot of the divine mountain. Its four hooves moved in unison as wind and fire seemed to rise beneath its feet. Moments later, it rushed to the peak of the divine mountain. What was shocking was that there were already two people on the divine mountain's peak, which was supposed to be empty. One was an indescribably beautiful woman, and the other was an incomparably handsome man with a pair of dragon horns on his head. His hair was as white as ice. The man was tied to a white jade pillar, and iron chains pierced through his ribs. Just looking at it would make one's flesh ache. Teacher! Zhou Wen's body trembled when he saw the man's appearance. Chapter 1774. The human man tied to the pillar was none other than Wang Mingyuan. Zhou Wen's first thought was that the matter of him and Wang Mingyuan being killed had been exposed to the immortals. This was because the beautiful woman standing beside the pillar looked like an immortal no matter how he looked at it. Before Zhou Wen could think further, the female immortal whipped Wang Mingyuan. The invisible whip left a new bloody mark on Wang Mingyuan's already blood-stained tattered clothes. His crystalline flesh split open as blood seeped into his tattered clothes. It chilled one's heart. Pa, pa, pa. The fairy lashed Wang Mingyuan again and again, increasing the number of wounds on his body. Wang Mingyuan's expression didn't change, but Zhou Wen's expression turned extremely ugly. The bronze lion that had tried to pass the test earlier roared and charged at the fairy. However, the fairy lashed out with a backhand whip. The seemingly tyrannical bronze beast body was torn apart by the whip, and the Rubik's Cube image disappeared at the same time. Zhou Wen's expression was ugly as he stared at the black Rubik's Cube for a long time. The Divine Mountain was in a dimension. Apart from entering through the Rubik's Cube, dimensional creatures could also enter without using the Rubik's Cube. Zhou Wen wasn't surprised that the fairy and Wang Mingyuan had appeared there, but the meaning behind it made him feel extremely uneasy. If the immortals discovered that Wang Mingyuan was a traitor, they could directly execute him or even imprison him and slowly torture him. But now they had brought Wang Mingyuan to the Divine Mountain to be whipped, allowing everyone to see it through the Rubik's Cube. It was clearly not as simple as torturing Wang Mingyuan. Zhou Wen even believed that the goal of the immortals was to force him to save Wang Mingyuan before taking the opportunity to kill him. It was one thing to know that there was such a possibility, but Zhou Wen couldn't bear to watch Wang Mingyuan be treated like this. Just as Zhou Wen was thinking about how to save Wang Mingyuan, someone was already one step ahead of him. The Rubik's Cube lit up again. Someone had begun a new round of challenges, and the person was none other than Zhong Zia, who had appeared once and left his name on the rankings. Zhou Wen wasn't surprised to see Zhong Zia. His personality had always been like this. He looked unruly, but he was the person who cared the most about his teacher, Wang Mingyuan. Zhong Zia is indeed still the same Zhong Zia. He has grown, but his original intentions have never changed. Zhou Wen couldn't help but smile bitterly. If the immortals were really targeting him, and they knew that he had obtained the golden three-eyed god's help, they definitely had set up everything on the Divine Mountain. Or rather, there was an apocalypse holding down the fort. Zhong Zia's trip was probably fraught with grim possibilities. Zhou Wen had already planned on using spatial teleportation to head to Divine Mountain. He couldn't let Zhong Zia die for nothing. Zhou Wen, don't be in a rush. Just as Zhou Wen was about to teleport back, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. He turned his head and saw that Jiang Yan was standing not far from the magic cube at some point in time. Jiang Yan was still as quiet as ever. There was nothing different about him from before. It was as though time hadn't left any traces on him. Zhong Zia shouldn't have gone. Zhou Wen wanted to explain, but Jiang Yan interrupted him with a wave of his hand. I understand what you mean. This is a clear trap, but it forces one to go. Jiang Yan looked at Zhong Zia, who was walking up the Divine Mountain, and said, however, I think you should believe in ya. Since he's going, he won't die for nothing. The golden three-eyed god I obtained is at the apocalypse stage. Zhou Wen directly pointed out the main point. He knew that Zhong Zia was very strong, but this trap might be targeted at the apocalypse stage. No matter how powerful Zhong Zia was, he wasn't at the apocalypse stage. He was far from it. You know this. I know this, and so does ya. Ya told me to tell you to just watch. If there's a need, he will seek our help. It won't be too late to go when the time comes. Let's take a look first. You have your Tao, and so does he. Let him walk and see, Jiang Yan said. Since Zhong Zia said so, Zhou Wen had no choice but to suppress his anxiety and watch Zhong Zia walk up the Divine Mountain step by step. After reaching the top of the mountain, he saw that the fairy and Wang Mingyuan were still there. The fairy was still whipping Wang Mingyuan. Wang Mingyuan was already covered in wounds from the whipping, and his clothes had turned into a blood-colored beggar's outfit. He looked like he was on the verge of death and in terrible condition. On the square in front of the temple, there was still the bronze lion's mangled corpse. The humans watching the livestream were discussing and even cursing with righteous indignation. Many people recognized Wang Mingyuan. Even those who hadn't seen Wang Mingyuan's face before gritted their teeth in hatred after hearing the host's introduction. In the eyes of ordinary people, Wang Mingyuan was undoubtedly a traitor, the most shameless traitor to humanity. Serves him right. Such a person should have died long ago. The heavens are blind to let him live to this day. Humph, traitors indeed don't have a good ending. Do they think they can enjoy wealth by joining the dimension? Aren't they still going to be killed by those fellows from the dimension? This is the first time I've seen a human being tortured by an alien race. Let's whip him a few more times and kill this bastard. Many people wished they could personally whip Wang Mingyuan or watch him be whipped to death with their own eyes. Upon seeing Zhong Zia walk to the temple, the fairy who was whipping Wang Mingyuan finally stopped and turned to look at Zhong Zia. You shouldn't have come. Wang Mingyuan raised his pale face and said weakly and bitterly. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm here because I'm happy. If I'm unhappy and want to leave, no one can stop me, Zhong Zia said indifferently. Zhong Zia said indifferently, but his footsteps did not stop. He continued to walk towards Wang Mingyuan. The fairy glanced at Zhong Zia and asked without any emotion or expression, You are President Ye, who killed many guardians and spokespersons, right? The moment that was said, the people watching the livestream were alarmed. Only then did they realize that Zhong Zia was that person. I want to take him away. Are you going to stop me? Zhong Zia carried his sword with a smile on his lips. His eyes seemed to be covered in a layer of mist as he smiled at the fairy. I won't stop you, but you have to leave your life behind, the fairy said expressionlessly. It's very simple to leave my life behind. Ask the sword in my hand. If it agrees, you can do whatever you want with it. As Zhong Zia spoke, he suddenly sped up. At the same time, he drew the sword on his shoulder from its scabbard and stabbed at the beautiful fairy like a rainbow. End of this chapter. Chapter 1775. It was clearly a straight stab without any additional transformations, but it gave off a wild and tragic aura. It was as though his strike would only result in death. There was no turning back. This sword technique has already reached the realm of perfection. Only after seeing this strike today do I know what a sword technique is. Professor Gu marveled. In a blink of an eye, Zhong Zia's sword had already stabbed in front of the female immortal. The female immortal gently waved her sleeves and brushed the blade. The seemingly soft clothes and the blade clashed, producing the sound of metal clashing. Zhong Zia's sword was forcefully swept to the side by the clothes as his body tilted. Zhong Zia, who had lost his balance, twisted his body into a strange state in midair. He forcefully transformed a stab into a slash and slashed at the female immortal once again. Dang! Dang! The sound of metal clashing was incessant. Zhong Zia's sword was brushed away by the sleeves again and again, but it changed ingeniously in midair again and again. From the beginning to the end, it was all offensive. There was not the slightest bit of dodging or retreat. The wild and demonic sword technique sent chills down one's spine. However, no matter how sharp and demonic his attacks were, they were always gently brushed away by the female immortal's sleeves. He could not even make her take half a step back. Even the spectators felt a sense of powerlessness and despair. What people feared the most was not the strength of the enemy, but the inability to see hope. Although the female immortal had not taken the initiative to attack once, it was enough to make one feel despair. If it were any ordinary person, they would probably have been defeated without a fight. Their confidence would have been ground to dust. Zhong Zia was Zhong Zia after all. Under such circumstances, not only did his fighting spirit and confidence not weaken, they became even more fervent. As expected of Zhong Zia. However, why does his sword technique feel odd? Li Xian marveled by the side. Li Xian was a person with an extremely firm will, but if he were Zhong Zia, he would probably feel a little discouraged in such a situation. A person as confident as Zhong Zia was either a true genius or a true lunatic. Of course, Li Xian also had his own confidence. He might be discouraged, grumbling, or even vexed, but he would never give up. However, a strange person like Zhong Zia, who did not seem to know what fear and despair were, was rare in the world. There were many standards to measure strength in this world, and there were also many standards to measure swordsmanship. Your sword could be fast enough, it could be ruthless enough, or it could even be slow enough. Zhong Zia's sword technique seemed to have reached the highest standard of all sword techniques. It was fast when it needed to be fast, slow when it needed to be slow, ruthless when it needed to be, and ingenious when it needed to be clever. But if one were to really comment on his swordsmanship, there seemed to be no one that was suitable enough. Senior Zhongzia's sword art is wild enough. Feng Qiuyan voiced out everyone's impression of Zhongzia's sword art in their hearts. Yes, it's wild. I was wondering why it felt weird. This person's sword technique is just too wild. It doesn't look standard. Many of his postures and actions are very irregular, but they are very effective. It's like. Li Xian couldn't think of a way to describe it. It's like dog paddling faster than a freestyle champion, Ming Xiu added. Yes, that's the feeling. Li Xian nodded immediately. Ming Xiu's words had hit the nail on the head. Zhou Wen sighed and said, back then, Jiang Yan, Zhongzia, and Hui Haifeng studied under teacher. Teacher once evaluated the talent of the four of us. How did he evaluate us? Who's the most talented? It's definitely you, right? Li Xian and company's interest was piqued. They stopped watching the battle and turned to look at Zhou Wen. Although tracking deliberately didn't look at Zhou Wen, he pricked up his ears to listen. Clearly, he wanted to know what Zhou Wen was going to say next. Zhou Wen shook his head and said, the one with the highest talent isn't me. Back then, teacher said that in terms of talent, Zhongzia was born to be an emotional person. If he was certain of something, he would be able to be extremely focused. No matter what he learned, he would learn it faster than anyone else. Therefore, among the four of us, he has the highest talent. What's your ranking? Tracking couldn't help but ask. Li Xian and company also wanted to know the answer to this question. I'm fourth, Zhou Wen said with a bitter smile. No way. Your teacher's taste is too bad. A person like you is only ranked fourth? Tracking blurted out. In her heart, she had already determined that Zhou Wen had extremely invincible talent. Otherwise, how could a human achieve such achievements? That's your master. You have to respect him, understand? Li Xian's words left Tracking speechless. Zhou Wen continued, Zhongzia is an emotional person. Jiang Yan's evaluation is that he's born to be heartless. Hui Haifeng's evaluation is that he's the most worldly person. As for me, I only received an average evaluation. Don't you think I'm the one with the worst talent among the four? It's fine if it's Zhongzia and Jiang Yan. Hui Haifeng's evaluation of him as a worldly person isn't even as good as yours, right? Ming Xiu asked. Most people are worldly. To be able to become the cream of the crop among billions of people and be called the most worldly person, how can it be inferior to average? Zhou Wen sighed and said, teacher is indeed very good at judging people. Hui Haifeng later became the league president. That was indeed the pinnacle of worldly people. As he spoke, Zhou Wen kept paying attention to the battle. Zhongzia was undoubtedly at the peak of the calamity grade. His every move didn't seem earth-shattering, nor did he have any luster effects like lightning. However, it definitely wasn't because he didn't have enough strength. It was because he had converged all his strength within his body, not letting any of it leak out. If it were the past Zhongzia, he definitely wouldn't have cared about such details. That was what Jiang Yan cared about, but now Zhongzia had actually done it. It was obvious that many things led to the same destination. Perhaps the starting point was different, but in the end they would all reach the same destination. Clang! Zhongzia's sword was once again brushed away by the female immortal's sleeve. However, this time, the female immortal didn't wait for Zhongzia to continue attacking. Instead, she suddenly extended her hand from her sleeve and grabbed the sword. With a gentle shake, Zhongzia's sword-wielding hand loosened. With a gentle toss, the female immortal grabbed the hilt of the sword and stabbed at Zhongzia. She's mimicking Zhongzia's sword technique? Li Xian exclaimed with a strange expression. The female immortal attacked Zhongzia relentlessly. Every move she used was clearly something Zhongzia had used before. The crux of the matter was not that the moves were the same. Even the wild aura was identical. If one only looked at the sword technique, and not the person, one would think that the person using the sword was Zhongzia. Using Zhongzia's sword technique to deal with Zhongzia caused him to retreat repeatedly. His body was slashed by the sword, leaving bloody marks. The rain is heartless, but the lover is sentimental. The author from Hunan is definitely capable. End of this chapter. Chapter 1776. Xian, watch carefully. Perhaps his path will give you some help, Zhou suddenly said to Li Xian. Whose path? That female immortal? Li Xian asked in puzzlement. No, it's Zhongzia, Zhou said with a shake of his head. Li Xian looked at the injured Zhongzia. Zhongzia clearly had a completely different style from him, but he didn't doubt Zhou Wen's words. Instead, he stared intently at Zhongzia. More and more wounds appeared on Zhongzia's body, but they didn't quickly heal. This was completely different from Li Xian's ability. However, after watching for a while, Li Xian's eyes gradually lit up. Although the sword technique the female immortal used was identical to Zhongzia's, the way she used it crushed Zhongzia, or rather, it was on a completely different level. When solving the same problem, although a primary school student's solution was correct, it was relatively complicated. This was the difference in knowledge. Now, Zhongzia's situation was the same. However, as long as Zhongzia saw it once, the same method wouldn't be able to injure him again. Every wound on his body allowed him to rapidly grow. It sounded simple, but there weren't many people in this world who could do it. This was because he only saw the sword technique and not the deeper things behind it. However, Zhongzia was able to deduce what was behind it in an extremely short period of time. Furthermore, he could immediately use it on himself. This ability was simply sick. The female immortal's sword technique posed less and less of a threat to him. Li Xian couldn't help but say with a bitter smile, "My brain isn't as good as his. I can't do that." "That's not what you should focus on." Zhou shook his head and didn't say anything else. Just as people thought that Zhongzia's most difficult period had passed, he began to be injured again. Furthermore, his injuries were even more serious than before. The sword wounds nearly severed his arm. The female immortal's sword technique had changed again, but it didn't exceed Zhongzia's sword technique. The same thing, in the hands of different people, would be used in different ways. This depended on the person, not the thing itself. In the eyes of a farmer, a tree was used to bloom and bear fruit. In the eyes of a carpenter, it was a wooden bed or a wooden table. In the eyes of a gardener, it was a part of a garden. It was the same for sword technique. The same sword technique could be given different meanings. The female immortal clearly did not want to kill Zhongzia directly. She wanted to crush Zhongzia's confidence, and also the confidence of humanity. A race could fail and decline, but there was still hope for them to rise again one day. However, once they lost their confidence, then even if they could survive, they would only be an accessory. "You will pay for your arrogance." Zhongzia, who was covered in blood, had a stubborn look in his eyes. "I like the look in your eyes," the female immortal replied calmly, but her sword did not stop. Sword after sword, the sword technique seemed to contain all the profoundness of the world. The same move was used, but the difference was like heaven and earth, rendering Zhongzia's ability completely useless. Zhongzia was like a trapped beast. Although he was still incomparably ferocious, he made others feel pity for him. Zhongzia's heart had yet to move, but the human spectators had already planted the seed of the female immortal's invincibility in their hearts. As the battle continued, this seed continued to sprout and grow stronger. If Zhongzia were to be defeated today, this seed would probably become an immortal wall, making it difficult for humans to regain their confidence as a race. "Do you know what the strongest talent in the world is?" Zhongzia suddenly retreated a distance and said to the female immortal, who didn't pursue him. "I don't know." The female immortal wasn't afraid that Zhongzia would escape. There was no teleportation array here, and it was impossible for the magic cube to teleport any creatures out. Even if Zhongxia wanted to run, where could he run to in the dimension? The strongest talent in the world is evolution. Any creature can become stronger through their own evolution. They can adapt to different environments and do things that they were originally unable to do. Zhongxia stared at the female immortal with a burning gaze as his body gradually underwent a miraculous change. And then? The female immortal asked with piqued interest. And my talent is super evolution. As Zhongxia spoke, the changes in his body suddenly intensified. The wound quickly healed and instantly returned to its crystalline, snow-white state. There seemed to be a luster flowing on his skin, and every strand of his hair was flowing with luster. Every setback I experience in life, every blow I suffer, even if I'm covered in wounds, as long as I can't die, the pain will eventually become the cornerstone of my evolution. It will allow me to forge a stairway to victory. Every wound you leave on my body will bring you closer and closer to your grave. Zhongxia's eyes became more and more fervent. It doesn't look any different, the female immortal said indifferently. Zhongxia's body didn't look any different. He wasn't like Li Xian. Every time Li Xian was injured, his carapace would change. It was a very obvious sign of evolution. Zhongxia wasn't the same. His body wasn't any different from before. He still had 2 hands, 2 legs, and a head. From Li Xian's point of view, Zhongxia's evolution wasn't enough. My evolution is here. Zhongxia's eyes seemed to burn as he pointed at his head. Just as he said that, Zhongxia's body moved again. He charged at the female immortal again and threw a punch at her exquisite face. The female immortal stared coldly at Zhongxia until Zhongxia's fist was about to reach her. She brandished the sword in her hand again. The sword was like a rainbow as it slashed at Zhongxia's fist. There was no sound of the fist colliding with the sword blade, nor did the sword blade strike Zhongxia's fist. As though he had foreseen it, Zhongxia retracted his fist that seemed to have struck with all his might. His other fist suddenly exerted strength and struck the female immortal's face from an unbelievable angle. A strange glint flashed in the female immortal's eyes. Before this, she could see through any move Zhongxia used at a glance. But this time, she couldn't tell whether Zhongxia's fists were real or fake. This could only mean one thing. Zhongxia's realm was already close to hers, making her unable to look down on him from a higher level. For the first time, the female immortal chose to dodge. She took a step to the side and dodged Zhongxia's fist. The moment the female immortal retreated, Zhongxia's attacks surged down like a torrent. He didn't give the female immortal a chance to counterattack. All she could do was constantly retreat and dodge. The spectating humans immediately felt as though they had been injected with adrenaline. Their hearts that had been filled with despair once again perked up. End of this chapter. Chapter 1777. Interesting. The female immortal didn't seem to feel any pressure as she watched Zhongxia with interest. Zhongxia's attacks became more and more unpredictable. After watching for a while, the female immortal seemed to think of something. She narrowed her eyes and said, "In that case, I'll let you evolve more thoroughly. Let me see to what extent your so-called super-evolution can evolve to." As she spoke, the female immortal stopped all her actions and stood there, no longer dodging Zhongxia's attacks. Zhongxia's fist was less than 10 centimeters away from the female immortal's face. However, without any obstruction, Zhongxia's fist seemed to be frozen. It stopped there and didn't move. Even his entire body seemed to be frozen in the air, like a frozen image. Such a scene made the spectators think that the livestream was stuck, but they soon realized that it wasn't that the livestream was stuck, but that Zhongxia had been frozen in midair. My new world is right in front of you. Continue your evolution. The female immortal looked at Zhongxia calmly, without any intention of taking the opportunity to kill him. Zhongxia's eyes were like flames as he stared at the female immortal. It was as though he was about to ignite, but his body was completely immobile in midair. The sliver of hope that had risen in people's hearts was instantly destroyed. At this moment, people realized that the hope they had previously thought of was just an illusion. The female immortal hadn't used her true strength to fight Zhongxia. Instead of calling it a battle, it was more accurate to say that the female immortal was just playing a game. This kind of blow caused many people's hearts to instantly sink into a bottomless abyss. The combat power that the two of them displayed was not on the same level at all. If the female immortal really wanted to kill Zhongxia, Zhongxia would have died countless times already. Even Zhang Chuanqiu, Xia Luchuan, and the other top human combatants frowned when they saw this scene. Their expressions were extremely ugly. The difference between the Calamity grade and the Apocalypse grade is too great. If we don't enter the Apocalypse grade, humans are still lambs waiting to be slaughtered in front of dimensional experts, Zhang Chuanqiu said with a sigh. Villains die because they talk too much. That female immortal is too arrogant. Perhaps Zhongxia will make her regret what she's doing, Xia Luchuan said through gritted teeth. Zhang Chuanqiu didn't say a word as he stared at the Rubik's Cube screen. Zhouwen also stared intently at the Rubik's Cube screen. This was the first time he had seen the power of an Apocalypse grade so clearly. That kind of power had already exceeded the understanding of the Calamity grade. He was unable to analyze what kind of power it was. However, the term New World that the female immortal mentioned made Zhouwen confirm that demonic neonate's New World powers were undoubtedly at the Apocalypse stage. A Calamity grade possesses the abilities of an Apocalypse, but its physique isn't at the Apocalypse level. Does such a demonic neonate have the ability to fight an Apocalypse? Zhouwen pondered, but he couldn't get an answer. Is the gap between the Calamity grade and the Apocalypse grade really that big? We can't even move in front of an Apocalypse? Li Xian said disheartenedly. The ability that Zhongxia displayed made Li Xian sigh at his inferiority. However, such a Zhongxia was only a bug that was being toyed with by a cat in front of the female immortal. When she was tired of playing with him, he would be smacked to death with a swipe of her claws. This made Li Xian mourn the death of a rabbit. No, he's moving, but he's moving very slowly, Jiang Yan said calmly. When everyone heard Jiang Yan say that, they couldn't help but take a closer look. Indeed, they realized that Zhongxia was indeed moving. However, his movements were so slow that they couldn't even be seen with the naked eye. He was even slower than a snail. Zhongxia is less than 10 centimeters away from the female immortal, but it's as though they are worlds apart. It's not that his speed has slowed down, but that the space between them has changed. Zhouwen had already noticed it and had figured out something. That female immortal is a paragon expert of the immortals. She's known as a transcendent immortal. Even among the apocalypses, she's a very powerful existence. Her new world is called Heavens Beyond. In her new world, your sky is within the sky, and she's outside the sky. No matter how close you are to her, there's a distance between them. Only she can injure others, but others can't injure her. When Tracking spoke to Zhouwen, although she didn't address him as teacher, she no longer had the disdainful tone from before. It was obvious that she had some acknowledgement of Zhouwen. What kind of darn ability is this? Doesn't that mean that they aren't in the same world? It's impossible for Zhongxia to injure her? Li Xian said gloomily. A battle between a calamity grade and an apocalypse grade isn't fair to begin with, Tracking said. If it weren't for the fact that the transcendent immortal is interested in Zhongxia's abilities, he would have died countless times over. This is a battle that has long been destined to be won or lost. That might not be the case. Jiang Yan stared at Zhongxia, who was at an absolute disadvantage, and slowly said, "That person isn't a man who will admit defeat easily." So what if he doesn't admit defeat? In front of absolute strength, all techniques are just fancy and impractical, Tracking said. Boom. Just as Tracking finished speaking, he suddenly heard an explosion from the Rubik's Cube screen. Zhong Zia's long hair fluttered as his eyes turned blood-colored, as though they were burning with blood-colored flames. His body was also abnormally congested with blood. His skin seemed to be covered in a layer of glowing sanguine light. His entire body seemed to be enveloped in a thin layer of blood-colored light. As the sanguine light on his body intensified, his body began to move as though the power of the new world was losing its effect on him. The power of heavens beyond has lost its effect. Li Xian was pleasantly surprised. It's not that the power of heavens beyond has lost its effect, but that Zhong Zia's speed is increasing. He's so fast that he can instantly traverse the world. Even close yet worlds apart can't stop his speed. Zhou was also very delighted. You're too long-winded. I've long told you that the powers that can't kill me will become the stepping stones for me to reach the pinnacle of victory. I'll use your blood and bones to forge my victory. Swallow the consequences of your actions. Zhong Zia's voice was as cold as ice, but his blood-red eyes burned like fire. The sanguine light on his body rose like a volcanic eruption. At that instant, his body completely recovered its mobility. The power of heavens beyond seemed to have lost its effect on him. Zhong Zia was like a devil from hell that was burning with blood-colored flames. With a fist that swayed with blood-colored flames, he crazily swung it at the female immortal's face. It was as violent as a blood-colored bolt of lightning. It covered a distance of less than 10 centimeters in an instant. He's going to turn the tables. Li Xian was ecstatic. The billions of humans watching the battle were as happy as he was. They were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. They had the urge to punch with Zhong Zia. What new world? What heavens beyond? What apocalypse? In front of humans who could evolve infinitely, they were all trash. They had to be hammered to death. Bam! In the next second, Zhong Zia's body suddenly sank. A white hand slapped the top of Zhong Zia's head, directly smashing his entire body into the hard rocky ground. His body and limbs were twisted into strange angles. The blood-colored flames burning on Zhong Zia's body instantly collapsed. All the bones in his body were shattered by the palm. After struggling for a while, he desperately tried to get up, but he only managed to raise his head slightly before falling back down. He lost consciousness, and it was unknown if he was dead or alive. Super evolution? Is that all? The female immortal was somewhat disappointed. She didn't look at Zhong Zia anymore as though she had just casually slapped an ant to death. The Rubik's Cube turned black at that moment. It was like a bottomless abyss that devoured the confidence and dignity of all humans. It made the people who had been cheering just a moment ago feel as though they had been enchanted. They stood there with ugly expressions. They were somewhat at a loss, but most of them felt their hearts turn cold. There were no more miracles. Zhong Zia was defeated just like that. The female immortal had given Zhong Zia all the conditions to grow, but Zhong Zia was still slapped to death. He died like a worm without dignity. End of this chapter. Chapter 1778. Zhong Zia is dead? Zhou stood there in a daze for a long time. Although human lives weren't that precious in this era, and life and death could be seen almost every day, Zhou never imagined that Zhong Zia would die one day. If he thought about it seriously, Zhou and Zhong Zia hadn't interacted for long, but Zhong Zia's death left Zhou with a strange feeling. It felt like when parents and siblings were together, they didn't feel particularly close to each other. Sometimes they even felt that the other party was particularly annoying. However, if something really happened to the other party, some kind of indescribable emotion would burst forth, and it was even difficult to suppress. Don't be rash. In fact, what Zhong Zia just said wasn't what he wanted me to convey to you. What he really said was that if he were to lose, no one should go again. Wait for the day when you are strong enough, Jiang Yan said as he pressed down on Zhou Wen's shoulder. How long do I have to wait? Zhou Wen muttered to himself. I know that you possess a powerful dimensional weapon. Perhaps that weapon has the power to fight a transcendent immortal, but Zhong Zia's defeat has already proven a problem. External forces are ultimately external forces. If your own strength doesn't reach that level, you will be a fatal weakness when facing an apocalypse, Jiang Yan said slowly. Jiang Yan slowly said, "You still need to be patient. At the very least, you have to ensure that you can survive. Otherwise, even if you go, it's impossible for you to avenge Zhong Zia, much less save teacher. It's just another life." Zhou Wen was a very rational person, so he understood what Jiang Yan was saying. Zhong Zia's abilities were already very powerful. The transcendent immortal had given him enough opportunities to grow his abilities to the point where he could even fight against the powers of the New World, but he still lost so tragically. Zhong Zia's fatal weakness was that his level wasn't high enough. It also applied to Zhou Wen. The terror grade is indeed too low. With this in mind, Zhou Wen's eyes became increasingly determined. Without a word, Zhou Wen suddenly used spatial teleportation and left Guide Ancient City. However, Zhou Wen didn't go to the Divine Mountain, nor did he head for the Magic Cube. Instead, he arrived outside Chess Mountain. Yes, Jiang Yan was right. If he was a weakness, he wouldn't be able to save Wang Mingyuan even if he went, much less avenge Zhong Zia. Therefore, he had to break through his present level. The Apocalypse grade was too far away, but Zhou Wen was only one step away from advancing to the Calamity grade. As long as he advanced the Demon God Bloodline catalog he obtained from Chess Mountain to the Calamity grade, he could truly advance to the Calamity grade. However, he couldn't obtain the Domain Core from Chess Mountain even in-game. However, there was a shortcut, the Dharch. On the Black Mountain wall, the little flower was still as beautiful as before. It looked a little fragile, as if a gust of wind could break it. "You're finally here." As though she had expected Zhou Wen to come, the Dharch wasn't surprised by his appearance. How can the Demon God Bloodline catalog advance to the Calamity grade? Zhou Wen wasn't in the mood to beat around the bush with the Dharch. He directly stated his goal. Very simple. As long as I'm willing, the Demon God Bloodline catalog can advance to the Calamity grade at any time, the Dharch said with a smile. "Tell me your conditions." Zhou Wen was already prepared to pay the price. "You know very well what I want," the one Dharch said indifferently. "Impossible." Zhou Wen naturally knew very well that the one Dharch had always hoped to use his strength to escape. Therefore, he had never been willing to come to Chess Mountain. "It's also impossible for you," the one Dharch said calmly. "This is the last time I'm coming to Chess Mountain. Give me an acceptable condition or we can go our separate ways." Zhou Wen was prepared to pay the price, but the price was definitely not to let the one Dharch escape. What a naive child. "Do you think the road belongs to you?" the one Dharch teased. Zhou Wen naturally knew that it wasn't as if he could sever ties with the one Dharch. "I want to kill the otherworldly immortal or be killed by her. If I don't return, all the roads will have nothing to do with me," Zhou Wen said frankly. "You aren't her match. Even if you have the golden three-eyed divine race, it's impossible. The golden three-eyed divine race is very strong, but you are too weak," the one Dharch said. "That's why I came to you," Zhou Wen said. "You are using your life to threaten me. Don't you think that's ridiculous? Why should I care about your life and death? Do you really think that no one can help me escape other than you?" The one Thearka's voice turned cold. "Yes, that's what I think," Zhou Wen said frankly. The one Dharch seemed to be taken aback for a moment. She never expected Zhou Wen to be so straightforward. After a moment, she suddenly smiled and said, "Although I really want to say that you are nothing, unfortunately, just as you said, only you can help me escape." This time, Zhou Wen was the one who was taken aback. Although he had long guessed this, he never expected the one Dharch to admit it so directly. "However, your use is only limited to before Earth is completely unsealed. Now, Earth can only last for 2 years at most, so your use is limited to 2 years," the one Dharch said. I won't give you even a second. Joan didn't know if what the one Larch said was true or not. Even if it was true, he wouldn't release the one Larch ahead of time. He. It was unknown if the one Larch was laughing out of extreme anger, but the one Larch laughed so hard that she bent her back. All right. I can give you the domain core you want, but it depends on whether you have the guts to bet with me. The one Larch remained smiling happily as though she wasn't angry at all. What are we betting on? Joan asked. Betting on whether you will regret it, the one Larch said meaningfully. Regret what? Joan asked with a frown. Regret killing the otherworldly immortals, the one Larch said. Joan didn't expect the one Larch to bet on this. After a moment of silence, he said firmly, I won't regret it. Of course, he could wait, but Wang Mingyuan couldn't. Joan didn't wish to see the people he cared about die again. Even if his life was uncertain, he wouldn't regret it even if he died in battle. Then make a contract with me. If you regret it, something on you will belong to me, the one Larch said with a smile. What is it? Joan asked. I don't know. Perhaps it's your life, perhaps it's your eyes, or perhaps it's your soul. No matter what it is, you can't reject it, right? If you want to obtain something, you have to pay the price. If you aren't willing to pay anything and don't want to take any risks, you can leave now, the one Larch said coldly. All right. Joan knew that making a bet with the one Larch was no different from making a deal with the devil, but he really couldn't wait any longer. Furthermore, even if he lost, he definitely wouldn't regret his choice. Then make a contract with me. The one Larch slowly said the contract and got Joan to repeat it. After Joan heard the contents of the contract, he thought about it carefully and felt that there was nothing wrong with it before repeating it. Very well, as you wish. The core of the domain you want is right there. The flower turned and a petal fell. After the petal fell, a figure appeared in front of Joan out of thin air. It was a beautiful woman. The woman floated in the air with a blank expression. She was unable to move. When she saw Joan in front of her, her eyes were filled with shock. End of this chapter. Chapter 1779. The woman in front of him was no stranger to Joan. She was Tianzua's sister, Jing. From a certain perspective, she could be considered his sister. Of course, neither Jing nor Joan admitted to this relationship. What's the meaning of this? Joan looked at the flower and asked coldly. Don't you want Chess Mountain's core domain? Chess Mountain's core domain is on her. She's the living core of the domain, the Larch said teasingly. What do you mean by on her? Joan's expression darkened. She was nurtured by me. The domain core that can match her is naturally Chess Mountain's domain core. Now, she has already used Chess Mountain's domain core to advance to the Calamity grade. What do you think I mean? The Larch said with a smile. You didn't hand the domain core to me. Is this a violation of the contract? Joan said coldly. Why would I go against the contract? If you need me to give it to you personally, I can remove the domain core from her body and give it to you right now. The Larch smiled even more happily. However, without the domain core, it's naturally impossible for her to be at the Calamity grade again. Furthermore, it's impossible for her to advance to the Calamity grade in the future. Apart from this domain core, there's no second domain core in this world that matches her. Do you think this will make me regret it? Joan said expressionlessly. Whether or not you regret it now has nothing to do with the contract. I just want you to understand that there is no such thing as a free lunch in this world. You're not willing to pay the price, yet you want to obtain such a precious item. How can there be such a good thing in this world? The Larch said with a smile, Young man, you have to remember that this world doesn't revolve around you. You can't do whatever you want. If you want something, you have to pay the corresponding price. Those benefits that don't require you to pay the price may cause you to lose more. How are you going to choose now? Do you want me to personally take out the domain core for you? The Larch smiled happily. How could Zhou not know what the Dharch had said? Since he wanted to ask a tiger for its skin, he was already prepared to pay the price. However, he never expected such a situation. But even so, Zhou didn't regret coming here or making a bet with the Dharch. His gaze turned to the motionless Jing, who was floating in midair. In fact, before today, Zhou hadn't carefully observed her because he had never paid attention to her. And Jing looked at Zhou with a complicated expression. From his conversation with the Dharch, she already understood what was going on. And Jing originally believed that she had obtained a huge opportunity, but she never expected that this would happen. She couldn't help but feel disheartened. She worked hard to prove that she wasn't inferior to Zhou, but the gap between them only widened. After meeting the Dharch, she thought that she finally had a chance to catch up to or even surpass Zhou. She never expected that she was only a chip in the Thearka's game with Zhou. Perhaps it couldn't even be considered a bargaining chip. This was because a bargaining chip had a chance of winning the bet, but she had no chance at all. As long as Zhou said the word, the achievements she had painstakingly cultivated to this day would be stripped away. And Jing had a deep understanding of what the Dharch had just said. That's something that doesn't belong to me to begin with. Take it away, and Jing suddenly said to Zhou. She didn't need Zhou's pity, nor did she need him to give in to her. She would rather start over. Otherwise, it would be meaningless even if she succeeded. If she accepted Zhou's pity, she wouldn't have the right to say that she could surpass him. Did you hear that? She's willing to sacrifice herself for you. What a good sister. How are you going to choose? Do you want me to take out her domain core and give it to you now? The Thearka's voice sounded indescribable disgust in Zhou's ears. Of course I want the domain core, Zhou said calmly. However, do you dare to make a bet with me? Oh, you want to bet with me? The flower's flower bud turned to Zhou as though it was sizing him up with interest. Yes, do you dare? Zhou asked. There's no need to use your clumsy goading method. I can tell you clearly now that I'll accept any bet. Even if it's unfair. Just tell me, how do you want to bet? The Dharch said with a smile. My bet is very fair. I want to bet my luck with you. Although the Dharch had made it very clear that she would accept an unfair bet, Zhou didn't plan on proposing such a bet. This was because Zhou knew very well that his knowledge wasn't on the same level as the Thearka's. Even if he believed that he would definitely win the bet, he might not really win. Furthermore, he might lose even worse. Are you sure you want to bet your luck with me? You probably forgot that to me. Even if it's a 1 in a billion chance, it's 100% as long as I'm willing. I suggest you bet on something with a higher chance of winning. For example, you can bet that you are a man or that I won't die today. That way, your chances of winning will be higher, the Dharch persuaded earnestly. There's no need. Since it's a bet, it has to be absolutely fair. I'll bet my luck with you. If you don't win, forget about her domain core. Give me another domain core. If I lose, her domain core will still be yours. The previous bet will still be valid. Furthermore, it will be as you wish. I'll help you escape now, Zhou said with a shake of his head. Then as you wish. How do you want to bet your luck? The Dharch was truly interested. She wanted to know how Zhou was going to bet. I want to bet with you on who will live longer. Without any hesitation, Zhou directly mentioned the bet he had thought of. After the Dharch heard Zhou's bet, she immediately understood his intentions. She said disdainfully, Are you betting that I'll live longer than you? No, I want to bet that I'll live longer than you, Zhou said. The Dharch couldn't help but be slightly taken aback. This was because it was impossible for Zhou to win such a bet. If the Dharch was willing, she could kill Zhou. Then, she would naturally win the bet. Therefore, this was a suicidal bet. What kind of figure was the Dharch? After some thought, she immediately understood Zhou's thoughts. Her voice turned cold. Do you really think I won't kill you? It's best you don't challenge my patience. My tolerance is very limited. You can kill me, but you won't win even if you kill me. You will still lose the bet, Zhou said indifferently. Why can't I win even if I kill you? The Dharch was somewhat curious. No matter how she thought about it, she couldn't understand why she would still lose after killing Zhou. It's starting to rain. It's a little heavy, but there shouldn't be any danger. I'm just afraid of a power outage. If I don't update tomorrow, there might be a power outage. Friends, don't worry about me. End of this chapter. Chapter 1780. If you kill me and win this bet, you won't be able to win the other bet. You can only win one of the two bets. If you don't kill me, you can win both bets. Do you want to win one or two? Zhou said slowly. Are you using your life to bet that I will win 2 rounds? The Thearcha's voice was somewhat cold. And Jing also looked at Zhou in shock. There was no need for him to do so. He could have directly taken her domain core. However, Zhou had actually used his life to bet the second domain core instead of taking hers. This made Jing momentarily unable to accept it. Why did you do that? Is it because of me? And Jing looked at Zhou blankly as her expression became more and more complicated. I'm betting that a person like you wouldn't accept such an imperfect outcome, Zhou said calmly. I didn't expect you to know me so well, but I can choose not to kill you. The bet is still ongoing. I don't need to give you a domain core. The outcome will still be my win, the Dharch said. Of course you can make the same choice, but if I don't obtain the domain core, the first bet isn't valid. Besides, I've already said that if you don't win, you will give me another domain core, right? The bet is still ongoing, which means that you haven't won, Zhou said. Do you think such a verbal trap can restrain me? The Dharch said disdainfully. No, I just believe that you don't want a meaningless victory. Furthermore, you care more about the other bet. What if I want to win like this? The Dharch asked. I'll go to Divine Mountain now, Zhou said without hesitation. The Dharch fell silent. Just as Zhou had said, if Zhou didn't obtain the domain core and head to Divine Mountain, his chances of survival were almost 0. Such a victory was indeed meaningless to her. What the Dharch wanted wasn't Zhou's life, but to win the bet. You're right. I want to win, but not like this. The Dharch didn't seem interested in continuing the conversation. The flower shook and a petal fell. The mountain wall of Chess Mountain parted like a door. A demonic beam of light flew out and charged straight at Zhou, who was standing outside the mountain. Zhou reached out to grab the stream of light and saw that it was a purple, multifaceted crystal. There seemed to be lightning and mist inside, constantly changing as though there were infinite changes. Get lost. When Zhou heard the Thearcha's voice, he looked up at the mountain wall and realized that it had already closed. The flower was gone. Why? And Jing's voice sounded behind him. He turned around and saw her staring at him with an odd expression. What do you mean why? Zhou asked casually. Why didn't you take my domain core? Why did you bet your life? And Jing asked as she bit her lip. Aren't we family? With that said, Zhou turned around and left. I still have something to do. I'll be leaving first. A family? Seeing Zhou turn around and tear through space to vanish, and Jing stood there in a daze, not moving for a long time. Although Zhou didn't mind the silence, he had already accepted Ouyanglan and Entianzua. There was no need to mention Ouyanglan. She had always been nice to Zhou. As for Entianzua, although he basically didn't give Zhou any face, Zhou knew very well. If it weren't for Entianzua's orders, Xing wouldn't have done so much for him. Zhou was someone who was amenable to coaxing but not coercion. Entianzua had done so much for him, so unless it was absolutely necessary, he wasn't willing to let Jing end up in such a state. He teleported back to guide Ancient City and wanted to immediately absorb the domain core to advance to the Calamity grade, but he heard another piece of bad news. Jiang Yan is finished as well? Zhou looked at Li Xian in a daze. He didn't snap to his senses for a long time. He said that there were some things he had to do. The opportunity that Zhong Zia risked his life to exchange for allowed him to see the fatal weakness of Sky Immortals. Therefore, he had to give it a try no matter what. Also, before he left, he told me to tell you that if he were to lose, he knew that you would definitely go again. He also knew that no matter what he said, he wouldn't be able to stop you. Li Xian sighed and said, he said that if you must go, study the battle between him and the Sky Immortals a few more times. Only go when you're confident. Is he dead? Zhou Wen asked angrily. Jiang Yan had clearly advised him not to go, but he had gone so quickly. I don't know. Take a look yourself. Li Xian played the recorded battle video. The video began with Jiang Yan ascending the Divine Mountain. There was another white jade pillar in front of the temple's door, and Zhong Zia was chained to it. However, unlike Wang Mingyuan, who was clearly still alive, Zhong Zia's limbs and head drooped. He relied on the chains that had penetrated his body to prevent himself from falling. It was unknown if he was dead or alive. The battle between Jiang Yan and the Sky Immortals wasn't complicated. It could even be said to be simple. He was defeated faster than Zhong Zia. He was defeated in one move and fell to the ground, his fate unknown. Zhou Wen knew that this wasn't because Jiang Yan was weaker than Zhong Zia. On the contrary, Jiang Yan posed a greater threat to the Sky Immortals. Therefore, the Sky Immortals became serious from the beginning. Zhou Wen watched the battle between Jiang Yan and the Sky Immortals many times. Although it was only one move, Zhou Wen saw many things. Jiang Yan, who was wearing the Guardian armor, had a high degree of fusion with the Guardian and reached the peak of the Calamity grade. However, he was different from Zhong Zia. Jiang Yan didn't have the super-evolved ability, so it was impossible for him to crack the power of Sky Immortals like Zhong Zia. Jiang Yan used another method, a method that belonged only to Jiang Yan. If Zhong Zia's ability was to fight against the world, then Jiang Yan's power was to assimilate the world. All power could be converted for his own use. In Sky Immortals, as Jiang Yan walked towards the Sky Immortals, he also assimilated and absorbed Sky Immortals. By the time he arrived in front of the Sky Immortals, Jiang Yan's strength and abilities had almost reached the same level as the Sky Immortals. Instead of saying that the strike was a battle between Jiang Yan and the Sky Immortals, it was more like a battle between two Sky Immortals. They had the same strength and techniques, but Jiang Yan still didn't survive a single strike. Zhou Wen trembled as he watched. Jiang Yan was determined to die in this battle. He didn't do it to defeat the Sky Immortals, but to let Zhou Wen see the essence of the Sky Immortals' power. The power displayed by the Sky Immortals was only superficial. It was difficult to see the true profundities within just by watching the battle. Jiang Yan used the power and abilities of the Sky Immortals, but he clearly displayed the profundities within. This wasn't a battle, or rather, it should be called an analysis. Jiang Yan used his life to analyze the essence of the Sky Immortals' power. After reading it, Zhou Wen didn't say a word. He returned to his room and summoned demonic neonate and the golden trident to guard outside before taking out the domain core. Chapter 1781. As the Demon God Bloodline Catalog circulated, the purple domain core gradually fused into Zhou Wen's body. The Demon God Bloodline Catalog was a very strange cultivation technique. It could imitate the power of any kind of demon. This was very rare among all the cultivation technique. The Demon God Bloodline Catalog was similar to Jiang Yan's ability, but it wasn't as direct as Jiang Yan's ability. Furthermore, it had more restrictions. Not being direct and having more restrictions didn't mean that it was weak. In fact, having restrictions meant a higher possibility. The Demon God Bloodline Catalog also had its advantages. Boom! Zhou Wen felt a miraculous change take place in his body. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he had been reborn. All the blood in his body boiled like magma, as though it was about to melt his entire body. Legend had it that when demons reached a certain realm, they would take human form. This process was known as manifestation. And now, the changes in Zhou Wen's body were similar. His entire body structure seemed to have changed. Of course, Zhou Wen didn't need to take human form. His body didn't change in appearance, but his body had more possibilities. Finally, a new calamity domain was formed, and the demon god bloodline catalog successfully advanced to the calamity grade. Just as Zhou Wen was about to carefully experience the demon god bloodline catalog that had advanced to the calamity grade, his body suddenly experienced an even more intense change. The lost immortal sutra, which hadn't moved for a long time, finally erupted again. As for the 8 cultivation techniques that had condensed the calamity domain, they were like 8 reservoirs that constantly provided all sorts of energy to the lost immortal sutra. No, to be precise, the lost immortal sutra was extracting its energy. An indescribable sense of comfort assaulted every one of Zhou Wen's nerves. He felt as though he was about to ascend to immortality. It was a feeling that he couldn't extricate himself from. If someone saw Zhou Wen at this moment, they would probably jump in fright. Zhou Wen, who was sitting cross-legged, didn't have lightning swirling around him, nor did he have any colorful energy flow. He only had his eyes open, his gaze blurry as though his mind was wandering the cosmos. There were some sweat stains on his skin, but his cheeks were so pink that it made one's heart palpitate. At first glance, she looked like a 16-year-old girl who was having a wet dream. There was even a hint of an ambiguous smile at the corner of her mouth. However, Zhou Wen didn't feel as comfortable as he looked. On the devastated land, magma erupted and floodwaters surged into the sky. A god stood high above the clouds, looking down at the untainted land. His eyes were as indifferent as water, as if he was not looking at the human world, but a lifeless sand table. The heavenly Tao is my Tao, and the Tao is natural. In the darkness, there seemed to be a voice reverberating around the god's body. As the god's mood changed, the entire world changed along with it. Everything grew and withered, the earth rose and fell, the oceans rose and fell, era after era in the long river of history. That was an unimaginable divine power. A god's will could change all living things. Zhou Wen's body was kneaded uncontrollably amidst the divine power. It was water one moment, stone the next, and grass the next. Just as Zhou Wen was alarmed by the irresistible divine power, he saw the god in the sky transform into another one. It was a deity that resembled light and lightning. He couldn't see his appearance, but he felt boundless divine power ripple over his body as the world turned dark. Let there be light. His divine will rippled. Hence there was light in the dark world. Let there be trees. Hence there were trees in the empty world. Let there be clouds. Hence there were clouds in the empty sky. Everything in the world was born out of thin air with a single thought. The originally dark and empty world gradually became colorful. One god after another appeared. There were a total of 8 gods, and each god displayed unimaginable divine power. It was a power that mortals could only look up to. It made Zhou Wen feel as tiny as an ant. Zhou Wen had never seen those gods before, but he could determine from the divine power they emitted that they were the 8 cultivation techniques he cultivated. However, the realm they displayed was far from what the current Zhou Wen could reach. When the 8 gods were displayed one by one, the world returned to the barbaric scene of a flood. However, on the devastated land, there was an additional frail human's back. As there was only a back, Zhou Wen couldn't tell who it was. It looked like a young girl. She seemed to be moving forward with all her might. Every step she took was staggering, as though she would collapse at any moment. Step after step, the girl fell countless times. Finally, in front of a lake, she was unable to stand up again. As for her hand, it was still extended towards the lake. Even in death, she failed to get her wish, even if her wish was just to drink a mouthful of water. The divine Tao has no joy, and the human Tao is inherently sorrowful. a voice sounded beside Zhou. He turned around and saw a woman with an indistinct face standing beside him. Although he couldn't see her face, Zhou immediately knew who she was. She was the woman of the Sigh of the King. Zhou opened his mouth to ask, but he couldn't speak. When it's time to choose, the divine Tao or the human Tao, which will you choose? The woman didn't look at Zhou as she stared into the distance where the sky and land intersected. The 8 gods appeared in the sky one after another. As for the girl, she stood up again and continued forward. However, the lake in front of her had already vanished. There was nothing in sight except a dilapidated land that looked like the end of the world. Who exactly are you? Zhou asked again, but this time, he made a sound. The woman didn't answer. All she did was smile slightly. With a wave of her hand, the world shattered. The 8 gods and the girl vanished, waking Zhou up from the dreamlike world. The powers of the 8 cultivation techniques had been fused by the lost Immortal Sutra. Zhou suddenly realized that he still had the same problem. Now was the critical period of condensing the calamity domain. The 8 cultivation techniques were originally simulated by the lost Immortal Sutra, and Zhou didn't have the physique required by the 8 cultivation technique. At this stage, by fusing the powers of the 8 cultivation techniques with the lost Immortal Sutra, he could truly possess the powers of 8 calamity domains at the same time. Zhou was already very familiar with these 8 powers. At the same time, he understood the future of the 8 powers in the illusory realm. Having 8 calamity domains at the same time was something that even the supreme existences of the dimension would find difficult to reach, much less a human. However, retaining these 8 powers also meant that he would lose the opportunity to condense a calamity domain that belonged to him. 2 paths, one with light ahead and the other filled with unknowns. Are you trying to tell me that you are my other path? However, Zhou didn't hesitate as he circulated the lost Immortal Sutra. The surging power instantly surged towards his brain as the calamity domain officially condensed. Chapter 1782. If the divine path is compared to the peak of the Tao, then the human path is the growth history of a weak chicken. The pinnacle is the benefit of being in our hands, but whether or not the future can be expected is still uncertain. Life is not a game. There are too many accidents and there is no chance to start over. No one knows if there will be a day when one can truly grow up. In reality, most people fall halfway like the girl in the illusion. Zhou knew very well that although the woman seemed to give him the choice of divine Tao and human Tao, she didn't really give him a choice. Whether it was the divine path or the human path, both had their own flaws. What the woman really wanted to tell him was the third path, godhood and human path. Fusing the path of divinity and human path, using the realm of gods as a foundation, yet constantly seeking breakthroughs like humans. Is this your path? Zhou didn't know the woman's background, nor did he know what kind of experiences she had. However, just by looking at her godhood and human Tao realm, the woman was probably like what Zhou had seen in his dreams in the past. She was a great figure that was like a pilgrimage. Your path has supreme glory, but it is not my path in the end. I do not stand at the same height as you. Even if I have such a state of mind, it is difficult for me to achieve anything. Zhou didn't choose the divine persona human that the woman had suggested. In the end, he chose the pure human Tao without any hesitation. Only after seeing 1,000 mountains could one say that there were no mountains in the world. Only after picking 100 flowers could one be qualified to say that there were no flowers that could catch one's eye. If one had not experienced anything, how could he dare to say that he had no more worries? The human path had tasted the joys and sorrows of the human world, and had seen all kinds of things in the world. Only when one was still a youth after experiencing all the prosperity could one be called a human path godhead. Once he made up his mind, the lost Immortal Sutra constantly circulated. Strange powers overlapped, forming a strange force field. In the depths of his soul, there seemed to be a soft sigh of a woman. It was unknown whether it was sorrow or disappointment. Boom! The terrorgrade that had bound Zhou for a long time finally broke through. It was as though he had been reborn. The world seemed to widen in his eyes. Humans walk the Tao while gods have their own path. I'm not a god, but I've managed to break through the path of gods. Zhou stood up and took out his phone to check his stats. Zhou, Calamity Grade Life Providence, Sigh of the King Life Soul, Slaughter Wheel of Fortune, Not Engraved 1 Rotation, Terror Transformation, Disqualified Beyond S-Class, Calamity Domain, Human Realm, Heavenly Realm, Power, 1000. After reading the information, Zhou knew that he was already standing at the true peak of the Calamity grade. Just like demonic neonate, all his stats were at the 1000 point. The appearance of the Calamity domain meant that he was at the Heaven grade. With such attributes, it could be said that he was invincible among Calamity grades, but Zhou had no confidence in withstanding a strike from a transcendent immortal. Thankfully, Zhou wasn't fighting alone. He still had the Golden Trident, demonic neonate, and a group of companion beasts. Furthermore, Zhou had another important guarantee. He had already downloaded the Divine Mountain Dungeon on his mysterious phone. Zhou had clearly taken away the most important three-eyed gold god on the Divine Mountain, but the Battle of the Magic Cube hadn't ended. This was a very important problem. If he could figure out why the Battle of the Magic Cube hadn't ended, it might be the key to saving Wang Mingyuan. After opening the Divine Mountain Dungeon, the Fog Lake and the Golden Fruit Tree were still there. He controlled the blood-colored avatar to come in front of the Golden Fruit Tree and casually plucked a golden fruit. Just as he had predicted, as long as he had the golden fruit, he could leave the Sacred Mountain Dungeon at any time. Unfortunately, the golden fruit in-game couldn't be brought into the real world. These things were meaningless to Zhou. He summoned demonic neonate and pushed down the golden fruit tree, revealing the entrance to the temple. He entered the temple buried at the bottom of the lake, but he didn't see the three-eyed gold god. The entire temple was empty. There's actually no three-eyed gold god in the dungeon. That's strange. From the looks of it, the true item to clear the dungeon isn't the golden trident. What could it be? Zhou carefully searched the temple. The divine palace was incomparably huge. Every item inside was many times larger than what humans could use. The stone throne, the stone pillars, the stone statues. The entire divine palace was filled with objects carved from those black stones. Apart from that, nothing else could be found. He walked through the entire temple inside and out, but he still didn't find anything. Zhou wasn't surprised. If it was that easy to discover, the Divine Mountain in the real world would have long been overturned by the immortals. They would have long found anything. The Battle of the Magic Cube hadn't ended, which meant that the immortals hadn't found anything. Even an apocalyptic stage expert couldn't find it, so it was normal that Zhou couldn't find it. Apart from the monsters in the Fog Lake and the Golden Fruit Tree, there's no living creature in the entire dungeon. There's no danger in the temple either. What's the point of such a dungeon? Zhou frowned in thought. Suddenly, Zhou's eyes lit up. He hurriedly left the temple's exit and floated in midair to observe the entire island. Could it be that the true item to clear this game dungeon is this Divine Mountain? Zhou sized it up for a while and muttered to himself. The Divine Mountain in-game didn't rise out of the lake like it did in reality. It was still beneath the lake, and there was nothing in the temple. No matter how he looked at it, the only thing that could be considered a treasure was the Divine Mountain itself. However, be it in the game or in reality, the Divine Mountain was an unparalleled existence. It was probably more than 10,000 meters tall. In addition, the Divine Mountain itself was extremely hard and heavy. Ordinary calamity grades wouldn't be able to damage it at all. To uproot such a divine mountain was probably more difficult than destroying a planet. Even those apocalyptic stage experts might not be able to do it, let alone Zhou. If they could take it away, the transcendent immortals would have done it long ago. Why would they leave such a divine mountain here? Zhou didn't give up. He entered the temple in the belly of the divine mountain and carefully observed every inch of the black stone in the temple, hoping to find some clues. After a thorough search, Zhou finally found something. I see. It's no wonder the battle of the magic cube hasn't ended. I missed something. Zhou looked at the carvings behind the black stone pedestal in front of him and was immediately enlightened. The carvings were mysterious and strange. They were carvings of strange beasts. In the middle, there was an exotic beast facing forward. It had 3 eyes like the celestials, but the pupils in the middle of the 3 eyes were hollowed out. Zhou took a look. The shape, position, and spacing of the 3 holes matched the golden trident. These 3 holes likely corresponded to the golden trident. If his guess wasn't wrong, he had to insert the golden trident into it to activate a certain mechanism or end the battle of the magic cube. However, after Zhou obtained the golden trident, he didn't do this. Therefore, the battle of the magic cube hadn't ended. However, there's no 3-eyed golden celestial in-game, so there's no golden trident. How do I clear it? Zhou thought for a while but couldn't figure it out. The golden trident couldn't be brought into the game, so Zhou had no way of experimenting. He could give it a try in reality, but he didn't know what would happen. Unable to find any other clues, Zhou could only give up and call Li Xian over. Li Xian, if I don't return this time, there's nothing to worry about. My dad can take care of himself, and someone will take care of your. As for you, I'm a little worried. You have to promise me something, Zhou said seriously. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.